Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. I appreciate you joining me during this crisis. Today I have the Washington Post Les Carpenter with me as we discuss the early part of free agency, what some of the moves mean, and what we think about the Redskins' approach. And then I have a few thoughts, as usual, weighing in on the quarterback situation in particular. Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, really? I have answers. And why Dwayne Haskins might be able to adjust quicker if there's an extended shutdown. Also, keep in mind you can read me on ESPN.com. We are updating all the free agency signings with nuggets of information on every player the Redskins sign. And now, here's my conversation with the Washington Post, Les Carpenter. Now I'm joined by the Washington Post, Les Carpenter. And Les, I'm bringing Les on because we're going to talk about, in general, a little bit about free agency and some of the Redskins moves, their approach. But I want to start with what it's like covering free agency, and the rest of the world is quarantine, all this bad stuff going on. This is a normal situation for us as far as being, just kind of locked on your job and locked in an office in your room. That's how it is for me, unless I'm assuming it's like that for you.
Yeah, I'm getting up really early in the morning, and I have an office here in the bottom of my house in my old garage, and I come down every morning and I turn on the light and I sit there and just start texting and calling and looking at my computer and trying to start and writing and doing all this at once, and then lift my head up for air about 4 o'clock is what it feels like. And then take a walk and come back in and do it until it's like midnight. And it's hardly, when you think about all that's going on right now, and you think about, all the, people that are, there's just so many people that are struggling right now. It's hardly a complaint. It's kind of fun. But yeah, it's weird. Our lives probably are among the very few that actually kind of are proceeding as normal.
Yeah. And I don't mean because you don't want me to feel flippant about it, but somebody asked me. Yeah. So someone asked me on the radio the other day, it's like, what's it like for you? It's like, right now we are lucky in that our lives, my life hasn't changed yet. I know everything around us has, as far as like you're holed up in your house and all that. And I'm talking to people with the Redskins who are at their homes. It's different for them. I said, this is what we usually do. Now, once this free agency period passes, then it's going to feel a lot different, because you can't go anywhere when you want to go somewhere. Now we can't go anywhere. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't go somewhere.
Well, and I think the thing that was interesting about covering free agency, and this is probably, pertains to the agents, this pertains to, the players, the people with the teams, and and the players as well, is, I think right up until free agency actually started on Monday, there was a wonder, is this going to happen? I know the league has kind of tried to stick with this idea that it's going to be as normal as possible, and it's going to hold free agency, it's going to hold the draft, no matter how these things are done, and it was just going to go on with this. But I think there was a very real thought, even on Monday morning, are they really going to do this when noon comes? And mentally, you have to be prepared for, yes, it will. But I think in another way, I'm sure you were thinking this way too, and I'm sure everybody else involved was thinking, well, I guess this is going to happen. Yeah. But what if it doesn't? And what do we do? So, the uncertainty is everywhere right now. And it's odd in some ways that the one league that isn't playing right now or wasn't scheduled to play right now is the league that actually is the most active.
And it's funny because I think I know all the other logistical issues, why, and, there's some people worried about the optics, but people need a distraction. Like I said, if this wasn't going on, it would be really difficult because all you're doing is, you're focused on all this bad stuff. And at least for right now, it's a distraction for people. And it just seems like there's a lot more, people are home, they're paying attention to it. There's a lot more interaction. If the Redskins make a move, there's a lot more attention to it, as small as they are sometimes, because people are at home and just want something different to talk about.
Yeah, it is oddly a diversion at this point. And again, as you say, you don't want to be flippant, because I don't mean to be either, but I do think for a lot of people, it's kind of like, oh, okay, good. I can worry about who the Redskins are signing or not signing, or, whatever team their favorite team is. And, I mean, given the reactions I've seen on social media and in emails and tweets and things, I guess I guess some people aren't necessarily finding their joy in free agency.
No, there is that. There is, and I'm sure some of the sitting home cooped up, it's like, listen, what people want from this franchise is hope, and they get those in the names of these big signings. But I think what you want too is I think there's people who want hope for there's going to be football this year, right? You want to believe that like what they're building and this is actually going to happen. And I wonder if it's because you can look ahead to hopefully at a period where this country is through the worst of all this stuff. We can get back to hopefully some normalcy. So, I just think there's so much at play with all this.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. And I do think too, though, that as you say, Redskins fans have long been looking for hope, just in general with their team. And I think, with the new coach and the idea of like, wow, that he's going to, look at the playmakers he had in Carolina, look at the defense that he had in Carolina. We're going to see some big stars here. And that didn't happen in the first couple of days. And I don't know if that's the end of the world either.
Right. And that's what I say, like, are you surprised at all by the approach? I mean, well, are you surprised at all?
I'm a little, no, because again, I mean, that would have all changed if they had hit the home run that they tried to hit. But when you think about it, you think about the things that he said he was going to do before free agency, that he wasn't just going to spend money for money's sake and fill holes to fill holes, just for the sake of filling holes, because that doesn't lead you to getting quality players. It makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of intriguing names in this free agency, but if you think of playmakers and offensive stars, aside from the quarterback, there's really only one name that you just would say, wow, that one really excites me. Okay, that's a big difference maker, and you're not wasting your money if you bring that guy in, and that's Amari Cooper. And I mean, if they had done that, then I think everyone would have looked at this free agency as this unbelievable home run, and I think he still would have been able to fill in with some other guys like he has. But by filling in with the other guys the way he has and not hitting the big home run, and I think everyone's looking at this like, well, this is a big failure. I don't know that I see it that way. I'm glad they didn't, or I should say I would be glad for a Redskins fan's point of view that they didn't go out and waste their money on somebody who may be okay and fill a hole because he was a name this year.
And, it's funny because some of those guys were defensive guys, and I was texting with this one defensive coach I know, and we were talking about some of these signings, and like he hates these big money deals because he's like, his question to me was, how often do you see guys perform up to their contracts? Name a player that's ever performed relative to his contract numbers. Now, there have been some examples, but when you're talking about, corners like Bradbury or Byron Jones getting what they did, I think it's going to be hard for them to play to the level that's now expected. And so what are you tying the money up in? And I think so I think I give them credit for not just going out and saying, well, we need a corner, let's go get him. And I think it's like, do you like the guy? They needed a receiver. They really liked Amari Cooper. They tried to get him and didn't, but they swung huge. So I do give them credit for taking the approach of what level are these guys at? Does their play match that pay level? And if it doesn't, then what are you tying up that money with?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, one thing that Rivera has said a lot is that he likes versatility.
Right.
It was quite obvious in his teams before. And I think he likes a lot of guys that he can bring at you on defense. I think he likes to keep guys fresh. I mean, how much have we seen that defensive line in recent years of the Redskins where you've got John Allen or Ioannidis or Payne or some of these guys, playing an unbelievable number of reps. And I think he loves the idea of having a lot of guys up front. I think he loves the idea of having a lot of guys in the middle and in the back where you're just rotating and rotating and rotating,
right.
and guys are fresh. And so, yeah, maybe some of these signings don't jump out at you and scream, wow, this is really exciting. I'm sure there's a few of these players that fans are running and Googling when their names come up. But they're smart, cheap signings of veteran guys. And that's another thing, too, when I think about last year and the struggles. I remember there was one point where I was in a conversation with one of the defensive coaches who just looked finally with frustration and said, but the whole problem that's going on right now is there's just too many young guys here. There's just too many rookies. We can't, they don't know how to play in this league yet. That's the problem. Well, now you don't have that problem. Now you got a bunch of older guys. So yes, you have good young players that they seem to like, but I think you're also going to see now here's some veterans around that locker room that can explain stuff to them and can go out there and they've seen everything before. And there isn't a surprise when you're in a big third down situation, you need somebody out there who's not going to be panicked.
Right. And I think that's a huge key, because we'd look around that locker room and like, where are all the leaders? And so when you bring in a guy like Thomas Davis, that becomes that guy. And I think Bostic, bringing him back, he helps fill that role as well. And I think maybe gives him a different sense of it, or maybe an increased role with that, but Davis especially. And I think the more guys you get like that in there, and some of this too, people have to remember I don't think in a year or two that you're going to see as many of these older guys, but when you're trying to establish your program now, you're going to do it with guys that have a certain approach. And that's why a guy like Davis is in there. And however good he is right now, don't know. But he is a guy that fills that leadership void and can spread the Ron Rivera message in that locker room. I think that's, for a coach setting a new foundation, I think all that is important. And I'm also intrigued. I would put Kendall Fuller in that too. I don't think you weren't around Kendall Fuller, correct?
I was not. I didn't get on the beat till the summer of 2018.
So, but he fills that. I wouldn't call him a strong leader, but I would call him a true professional. And I think you need a lot of those too. So yeah, I think there's some merit to all of that and what they're looking for.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that's going to matter at some point next season. And you're right. You make a good point about the fact that, maybe you don't see as many older guys in 2 years, but in 2 years, your younger guys are going to be those older guys, or at least those middle of the career guys. And you don't have to worry about that. They now understand the culture. They now have, they have their feet under them. Now Cole Holcomb is the more grizzled linebacker, and those guys in the secondary, the Jimmy Morelands and the Fabian Moreaus and those guys, they all have some experience now. And those guys up front are now sort of heading towards the prime or after the prime of their career. And so, yeah, I think it's a smart move. When you're sitting here all day covering free agency, you love it when there's something exciting. But I can't say that I've looked at a signing that they've made yet and shook my head and said, what a dumb move that was. I actually think they kind of all were rather clever.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I have to do every time they make a move, there's this file we have to do is like, okay, what does this signing mean and what's the risk? And with each time the risk, I'm like, well, there really isn't a risk. Because even like with Thomas Davis, it's not a big deal, so there is no risk. I mean, he may not be here for more than 1 year, and he's not taking somebody else's job. I mean, they don't know when Reuben Foster is going to come back. Who knows? So it's not like he's bumping Reuben Foster aside. Reuben Foster can't play right now. So I don't see anything, even like the running back, this J.D. McKissick. It means that Chris Thompson is gone, but Chris Thompson was gone anyway. So, I don't see any of these as big, I don't see a lot of risk involved with any of them. And speaking of the McKissick, and I want to get to Thompson now.
McKissick, yeah. I was just about to say, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was about to say that's another versatile offensive player. He doesn't have to play. He doesn't even have to play running back. This is a guy who played a little receiver in Seattle. So each one of these signings kind of has a purpose beyond just a leadership piece or that's the way I look at it, is that I think that they're part of a bigger puzzle here that still has to be put together, and probably now we'll lean more on the draft to do so.
Right. And I think And I think you talk about the versatility. And when I was looking at players, like, how versatile is this guy? And I would even include the safety, the Sean Davis. That's a guy that, and he's 1-year deal, and he's interesting because he played free safety 1 year. He came in he was a cornerback. He tried some strong safety, free safety. I talked to another coach.
He's played nickel in the league before too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I talked to another coach about him, and then I was surprised because, Pittsburgh, they went and got Minka, and fans there were they okay with Sean Davis leaving, whatever. But I did talk to a coach who I respect in this league, who who does not coach here, but he really likes Sean Davis because of that versatility. And again, that goes back to that buzzword. And I think in this day and age, the more versatile you are on defense, the more you can do with your coverages and your schemes and all that. So,
which we saw the failure to do so in recent years here.
I do want to spend 1 minute though, or a couple minutes talking about Chris Thompson, because that we knew going into this, he wasn't going to come back. This seals a deal. How would you sum up his time here and getting to know him the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, I mean, anyone who was ever around him absolutely loved Chris Thompson. I mean, you couldn't. He was just so much fun to sit and talk to, and so thoughtful, and always was, always had a great little story to tell about something. And when you're sitting here trying to figure out something about the team, it was great to go talk to him. Plus, on the field, when healthy, he was such an exciting, explosive player, and was perfect for what Jay Gruden was trying to do. And yeah, it's sad because I think he was just kind of heading into the prime of his career, and I think his skills kind of fit something that everybody kind of likes in this game right now. That small back who you could just put the ball in his hands and let him go and kind of skitter around and avoid tackles and kind of get into mismatches. And if he was healthy, I think we would have really seen some very good years of Chris Thompson, and it didn't happen, but hopefully he's going to get that shot again. And if his body kind of heals up, and but yes, I think it's sad for those of us who dealt with him every day, and probably in that locker room is very popular, but also it's something that I think he's a player that I think a lot of fans enjoyed. And that's Redskin fans are going to miss him a little bit. I mean, he definitely he definitely had his moments.
He did, and just like you said, in the locker room, he was one of the few guys. Like, I'm less. I don't know how to explain this to you, but like for those listening, you go in there in the locker room on a Monday. It's a day after a game, and Chris Thompson was always available. Not every guy was. I mean, there were a handful of guys who usually were, but Chris Thompson was always available, and he would always talk. And when he talked a lot. And you would be sitting there and like, you don't want to leave because he gives you a lot of good insight. And then next thing you know, you have 10 minutes to transcribe on your tape recorder because he just keeps going. And then people would leave the group, and somebody else would come on and ask him more. He's like, do you have a couple more minutes? And he's like, all right. And he would always go. And so like, there are a lot of things like that go a long way to shaping people's opinion of you, because it's not. I don't know that I could be like that, and because that how it is. I mean, you get inundated with these questions, and I always give him credit for how he approached it, and it just speaks to his. I think part of that too, Les, it speaks to a humility that I always thought he had.
Well, yeah, and that's actually a point I was going to make is that, sometimes guys who are like that, it's a little bit they're there to promote themselves. Right. Chris never really talked about himself unless you asked him and he answered the question. But he wasn't there to talk about Chris. He was there to basically talk about everybody else, and he seemed to enjoy that. And
yeah.
Look, I agree with you. Not everybody is wound that way, and not everybody should be. But he was definitely a fun guy to go and talk to. And again, as I said before, he was a fun guy to watch on the field. I mean, that's to me, I think kind of the sadness that a lot of Redskin fans will probably feel is like, well, probably won't get to see this guy as a Redskin anymore. And he really was a good, fun player.
Yeah.
And it's just, it was unfortunate that he never could get on the field that much the last couple of years. And he seemed very frustrated by it. But, that's kind of, I mean, look, that's the story of the Redskins circa 2018, 2019.
Yeah, it definitely is. And he was fun. The thing I always liked too is he would work on his weaknesses, and he would he would get better in areas every year, and you could just see it, whether it was his pass blocking, his route running, being more patient on certain routes. And he could point to times where he learned lessons. And he also, again, that humility. I remember him talking one time as he started to get going a few years ago, and he's starting to put up some big stuff. And how Darren Sproles would say stuff to him after the game. He's like, that was like a guy that he looked up to. No pun, not making a joke there either, because they're both short, but he was a guy he looked up to. And so it meant something to him for Darren Sproles to recognize that you're a really good third down back. And I think, but he took a lot of pride in that. So I hope he rebounds well, because he's an easy guy to root for. So, where do you think this goes for the Redskins from here? I mean, I assume, they still have some lingering questions. You got Trent Williams, you got Quentin Dunbar. Where do you think things go from here?
Well, it sure feels through the first couple of days of free agency, and maybe it would have been different if they had been able to land Cooper, but I still think even without that, these defensive moves are going to be made, that they are going to build around a defense. You have a defensive head coach. You got obviously a very good defensive coordinator, defensive coordinator who's been a head coach for a long time in the league. They're both very aggressive with their defenses. I feel like they're going to come in and say, well, if nothing else, let's make a really good defense and go from there. That's sure how this is feeling right now with the moves that they've made. Then you could say they'll be a little bit younger on offense and they'll have to learn. The two most important things with Dwayne Haskins, seeming that they're at least somewhat committed to Haskins. I still think they're going to bring in competition for him, but everything you continue to hear, speaks to the fact that they like what they're seeing in the way he's handled the offseason. Right. It's probably unfortunate for everyone that now nobody can go into that building. But I think that they like where they think he might be headed, but they need to get him weapons, and they need to make sure they can protect for him. The Trent Williams / left tackle question is an enormous one that doesn't have to get resolved today or tomorrow, but probably should by the draft, whatever they're going to do. Or if some way that Trent stays, I know both of us have kind of gotten that feeling from him that he doesn't think he's going to, but if he does, whatever, that's how they'll move forward. They've got to be able to find someone else to catch the ball, even if it means, I thought it was interesting. We should talk about this for a second, that they did not overspend at tight end. Right. They did not stretch their money when it's very tempting to do so. Now, of course, they're not done with free agency, and even as we speak, they could be going out and doing something, but they're probably not going to stretch their money at that position. Nonetheless, they're going to have to find tight ends, because you just can't have a young quarterback not throw the ball to somebody like that. Right. But that's probably where I think they address things next is, assuming they still draft Chase Young, which I can't imagine that they wouldn't at this point. Then you address the offensive line, and you address who's going to catch the ball.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think we all expected and heard that Hooper was a target, and then as it got closer, you realized that they weren't going to go that high, and so they pulled out. And so I know there's some interest in Delaney Walker, and there's ties there, but you're not going to have to spend big for him, and he would be a veteran guy, just much like what they were looking at with Olsen. Bring a guy in here, but you still got to get somebody else. So yeah, they have. Listen, I know you're probably getting it too. Like, where's all the offense? They're going to get some at some point, because I agree with everybody else. You have to. So I think I always tell people it's March, whatever. There's a long way to go, and sometimes some of their bigger guys they've added in recent years, whether it's Josh Norman, Deshaun Jackson, those guys come later because things happen later too. So many phases to this, Les. Many phases.
Things happen later. Who knows? Maybe somebody fails a physical in this, and then this free agency, the way it goes right now, and someone comes up later. Who knows? But I think kind of the way things look now, I wouldn't be stunned if, say, Chase Young's your first pick, and then after that you see a whole lot of offense.
Yeah.
But then again, I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, you should be able with that third round pick to get a receiver that may even have a first round grade.
Yep.
And then you got a couple fourth round picks, and you got picks later, and who's one of the most one of the best tight end weapons in the NFL right now is George Kittle, who was a fifth, sixth round pick.
Jordan Reed was the third. Chris Cooley was the third.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of good tight ends, perhaps, sitting in that draft. We just don't know a whole lot about them right now, and maybe a lot of them will not be that great NFL players, but maybe a couple will. And that's again where they've drafted very well. You've kept that person who's drafted, Kyle Smith, and you would think that they've been able to identify some guys perhaps in the draft.
And a little plug, Les, because a few weeks ago I talked to ex-Redskin Logan Paulson about some of those tight ends. How about that? So if anybody wants to listen about a couple tight ends in the draft, he talked about some. And I also talked to Dane Brugler about Adam Troutman, the kid from Dayton. So anybody listening, you can go listen to those and learn about the tight ends. But yeah, I mean, I think that will be an area that you can look at, and then whatever happens with Trent, you get another pick there. And maybe you trade for a guy with him. Maybe you pick up a receiver or a tight end in a trade for Trent Williams or involving him, something. So there's a long way to go, and there are a lot of cards to be dealt or played at this point. So, well, Les, listen, I appreciate you joining me, and it's nice to talk about something that is a good distraction for everybody.
Whoever thought that the Redskins would be a good distraction for everybody, but
especially after this past year. But it is. Hey, just for people to know, tell them where they can find you on social media, and obviously you're on the Washington Post. So
yes, you make sure you're reading the Washington Post for everything going on right now, and you can find me on Twitter at Les Carpenter.
There you go. That's the man. Les, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, John. It's always fun.
After this break, I'll be back to discuss a few topics, including the quarterback situation and how much did they really offer Amari Cooper. Okay, now a couple of my thoughts on free agency. Let's start with number one. They really did swing big on Amari Cooper. It was an old-fashioned Dan Snyder courting in terms of the aggressiveness. I was always told they would be aggressive for the guys they want, not necessarily going out there and spending crazy, but the guys they want, they would go hard after. The figure that my ESPN colleague Ed Werder tossed out was $22 million a year. I heard it was more like 23. Regardless, the point is they went big, and it highlights their desire to add more weapons. There are other receivers out there who might be available in a trade. For example, the Rams want to deal Brandon Cooks. I don't know yet what Washington's interest is or would be in him. But that's the kind of guy I think you're going to look at maybe if you're looking at a trade. I do think they will add a veteran wideout in some fashion. Can't promise that, but that's what I think. And don't forget, some guys will eventually get cut because of their contracts. Don't assume they're done looking. Number two, as Les and I talked, I don't mind their approach. Yes, everyone gets excited if they add a big name, but the point is to build right, not just add big names. What it appears to me is that with the one-year deals, they're finding stopgap guys until they can pursue the long-term additions. I can't tell you how many times I heard the phrase, build it right. It's the same approach they'll take in the draft. They won't just trade down to get more picks to add more young guys. They have a lot of young guys. They want to get legit talent. That's why, to me, Chase Young remains the direction I believe they'll go. But if you're not in love with the guy in free agency, for example, there's no reason to spend big money on them and perhaps restrict you in future years from doing what you want. What you usually end up with that is a bunch of higher-priced players who aren't higher-priced playmakers. That's why you didn't see them sign any of the other names linked to them before free agency. Yeah, they may have liked them, but if you don't love them, you don't spend big. It just creates future issues and creates more situations where the Redskins have big money guys who don't make big money plays. That has been a losing proposition in Washington. Now, whether or not this is the right way to go, I think there are many ways to improve, but it's the way they're taking, and I don't mind it to this point. Again, long way to go. The Redskins' issues in the past extended beyond what the guys they signed early in free agency. It was more about cohesiveness between the front office and the coaching staff, etc. That synergy seems to be there. I think that lends itself towards building a better roster, and I think with Rivera and Jack Del Rio in particular, I think there's some stronger guys in charge that too will make a difference. Where it goes, let's see. Number 3, I don't have any great answers about what's going on with Trent Williams. I do know and do believe the Redskins would be somewhat flexible in their compensation return in a trade. Yes, they want a second-round pick, but what if someone offers them a high third and something else? I believe they could work toward a deal. Just a single third or a single fourth especially would be hard to get it done unless they just tire of the situation. I think they wouldn't get to that point until we get closer to the draft or maybe the day of the draft. The teams I'm wondering about right now are Minnesota and Tampa Bay. The Vikings still have to clear up some cap issues, and yeah, Tampa Bay signed Donovan Smith to an extension last year, but he's not very good. He can be bumped to another spot, and they're going to get Tom Brady. So you need to protect him as much as you can. You have a short window to do it. I don't know if Williams ends up with these teams, but they're the ones that make sense. The Redskins always viewed the teams in that win-now window as the ones who would be most likely a landing spot for Williams. It's still on his side to get a deal done in the first place, however, and until that happens, we wait. Number 4, finally, the quarterback. The Redskins will not be adding Cam Newton. I know Ron Rivera liked him. That was his guy in Carolina. I also know the Redskins do like Dwayne Haskins, even if they don't know yet where he's going to go with the next step. The phrase I've always heard, they were excited about how he finished, but nobody yet can say, hey, they got their guy. The quote would be, to me, nobody can say, hey, we got our guy for the next 5-10 years. They don't know that yet, but they were excited about how he finished. But not only would Newton be expensive, he's also an outsized personality, and that may have worked fine in Carolina where he was drafted. He grew up and became a star, but I don't know that it would go over as well in a new locker room where they're trying to gain a certain culture and guys just don't know him. And that's not to say he's a bad guy. I'm not saying that. That's not the point. But I do think that when you're putting together things like, with the locker room, I think you have to take everything into account. And I think the other factor, a big factor, becomes here, he'd also be the starter. You're not bringing him in to compete with Dwayne Haskins. That's not where he's at. He's going to come in to be the starter. And I don't think that's what you want or they want for Haskins. It's one thing to bring in someone who can either back him up or start if Haskins struggles. That's the kind of guy I still think they end up getting, a Case Keenum type. If you bring in, and I don't know who that is right now, but if you bring in a surefire starter, you may as well trade Haskins now. I think that would be very difficult for him to proceed in that situation, and that's not the plan either. I know my colleague Booker McFarland with ESPN mentioned the Redskins as a landing spot for Jameis Winston. I can tell you that ain't happening. Number 5, the Redskins need to be careful with Haskins. He's a young kid who has already endured a lot in Washington from the moment he was drafted. I know they must do their due diligence with all these quarterbacks. I hope they're communicating to him what's going on. Now, if they truly like a guy like, say, Tua, then you can't lie to Haskins either and say they have no interest. What happens if they end up drafting him? Well, clearly you would trade him. But you can tell them what they're doing, and some of that is about smokescreens, and perhaps a lot of it is about that. But the organization can't let the kid continue wondering what's going on. I'm all for making him earn the job and having a plan for him as well. It wasn't until Bill Callahan took over that he was given more intense attention, and I think that mattered. Clearly, I think Haskins will respond well when given that level of attention. Not everyone is built the same, and not everybody requires that. But if he needs it and you're going to try and develop him, then you have to give it to him. But again, make him earn the job. That's okay, because that's the only way you're going to get the best out of him. And so far in the offseason, things have been good for him. One concern of mine would be this is number 6, sorry. One other concern of mine would be what happens if the players can't return until training camp. That's a legitimate thought at this point in this virus crisis. How quickly can Haskins then pick up this offense? He struggled with it last year. It wasn't about him not being smart, But from there on, it was more about the extra time he needed to devote to it. Keep in mind the verbiage in this offense is far less cluttered than in a West Coast offense. A West Coast play contained maybe around 16 words. It's ridiculous, but it's what those coaches do in that offense. In this one, it's a numbering system, so it's much shorter and easier to spit out in the huddle and to remember. Also, quarterback coach Ken Zampese went through the 2011 lockout and had to get a rookie quarterback ready to start in Andy Dalton with Cincinnati. And Ron Rivera had a rookie quarterback in 2011 in Cam Newton. The staff should know how to proceed in that situation. Let's hope they're not out this long. The other part of that is the playbook. Haskins has to learn the playbook. And I know people who are in the game would be surprised if he doesn't already have it, somehow landing it from whomever. So I think the thing would be there is like, yeah, he's got to learn the playbook, wink, wink. In other words, they know he probably already has it. But again, let's hope that this situation doesn't develop that way, because that's not good for any of us in this society. That's it for this week. Thank you to Les Carpenter from the Washington Post for joining me, and thank you for listening. We have scientists scrambling to solve a health crisis, and all we do here is talk about a game. I hope you see it as a distraction. Stay safe, folks.